Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. You're listening to part 2 of our discussion of Dear John. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, you probably should go and do that first. We've already talked about most of the principal characters, and we've started talking about a specific episode. We're halfway through it. In fact, if you carry on listening, we're going to jump straight back into that episode. So do go and catch up if you haven't already, and for everyone else, enjoy.
But this part where, so we see he goes to his own former home and picks up his son, Toby, and we have this encounter with Wendy. This is the first time we meet Wendy, right?
It is. It's the first time we've seen her. He's spoken to her on the phone, but we don't hear her. But, so we know she's there,
So this is a bit of a revelation of this character. But the thing that struck me initially is that both Wendy and Toby are utterly contemptuous of John. Like it's not that they dislike him. It's not that they're angry with him. They've just got utter contempt for him.
Because he's a pathetic man.
Yeah, exactly. And you kind of think, well, fair enough.
Well, she's obviously learned long ago that she can just do whatever she
wants. Walk all over him.
Walk all over him, exactly, yeah. And obviously the son is picking up on that as well. Yeah,
but so the son walks around the zoo telling him how great Uncle Mike is.
Yeah.
And John, because John is good-hearted, he does his best and he doesn't say it, yes, but Uncle Mike's an absolute whatever.
Yeah.
And so he just sort of stands and takes it and agrees with him and says all the right things. And again, it's pathetic. It's utter pathos.
but it doesn't make us like him. It doesn't make us feel sorry for him.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it doesn't make him particularly sympathetic.
It's just pathetic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are occasional moments where we'll kind of see some in a moment where he sort of stands up for himself, but it so immediately falls back.
Well, I noticed this in a couple of the episodes we watched, that John does get angry, but often it's when he's on his own. Like when someone leaves the room, he gets furious and we see him repeatedly headbutting the wall. He does that a few times. But then as soon as the person comes back, he's all, back into character. Oh, yeah. Yes, whatever you need, whatever you want.
But there's never a breaking point where he finally snaps and kills everybody, which is that's what it means.
That would be a good way to end the second series.
But there is actually, you're bringing that up. There's quite a lot, not in this episode, but quite a lot in this series of John talking to himself.
Yeah.
Now they do quite a bit of stuff where he's on the phone to someone and it's like a one-sided conversation, and they use that for humour. But then there's a lot of stuff where he is just on his own talking to himself, to the point where a couple of times he'll go, "You're talking to yourself again, John." "Yes, I know."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And he acknowledged it. And I think one of the main problems with that is I don't think it's very well done. I don't think it's performed well enough. There is a real talent to talking to yourself.
Soliloquizing.
Well, if you're on stage and you're to be or not to be, I think you can get away with it a lot more. But on film, on TV, where you're supposed to ultimately believe that this character is just sat in their house on their own, it's something that Richard Wilson does really well in One Foot in the Grave. We talked about that.
Yes, he does, yeah.
I know, in Rising Damp, usually they get Vienna in so that Leonard Rossiter isn't talking to himself. He can talk to the cat. That's the trick. But yeah, it's something that, I don't know, Ralph Bates just doesn't do that well. Maybe it's the writing. I don't know. It just never quite plays. And this is a good opportunity to talk about Ralph Bates' performance in general.
Okay.
I can't figure out what's going on. I can't figure out if I do like it or I don't like it. I don't think he's a bad actor by any means, but there's something about this doesn't work.
I don't like the character, but we've talked about how pathetic he is. But if that's what he was trying to do, he's done a good job of it, I suppose. But it doesn't strike me as very funny. I don't think he's a good comic actor. Like you say, his timings, he hasn't got that turn of phrase, that timing.
There's a real lack of charm, I think. And I think that's in the character. I just think it's a mistake. I think you can be a pathetic kind of man if you're still charming, if you're still likable. It's whatever Ralph Bates is bringing to it. It's certainly not that. So Ralph Bates himself, I mean, he was a straight actor. This is pretty much the comedy on his CV. This is certainly in terms of a meaty lead role.
See, I think of Ralph Bates as like Hammer House of Horror.
Yeah.
That sort of schlocky British horror type actor. There's a film that I saw him in, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, which is, you know, from the title, it's an incredibly exploitative Hammer horror. And obviously, I don't know when it came out, but I must have seen that at some point in my teenage years. And I've got to be honest with you, it made quite an impression on me. Very confusing time, teenage years. But actually, I think I saw that film after Dear John, even though it was made years before.
Yeah.
And just being incredibly confused that Dear John was in this horror film. What the hell's going on? But I suppose actually looking at his career, Dear John is the exception to the rule rather than this one-off horror film that I happened to see.
Yeah, he did several Hammer horror films. And, you know, obviously Hammer horror has a something of a reputation, but people do tend to forget that they're crap. And even the good ones were crap.
Genre exploitation films, aren't they?
Yeah, even the ones that are supposedly the legacy ones aren't particularly good in terms of filmmaking. You know, I mean, it's not my taste anyway, so I'm a poor judge. But also, he was the later end. You know, he was like, oh, Peter Cushing isn't doing anymore. Well, we need someone else, like Ralph Bates, it turns out. And so he was playing some solid lead roles in these films in the early 70s.
I see in my estimation that Hammer is to horror as Carry On is to comedy. You know, it's just a very British camp version of that.
Well, interesting side note here. Hammer, obviously they did all the horror stuff, but they did other things. And one of the things they did in the early 70s was taking established properties and making films of them, such as sitcoms. They did the On the Buses films. And the On the Buses films made a lot of money. They did really well out of that. Yeah, Love Thy Neighbour, Nearest and Dearest. There was quite a few, I think, but...
And Hammer produced them.
And Hammer was the one who made them. And it was a time of British film. The reason these films were getting made was because, you know, there were certain things in place to help incentivize British film, the British film industry. So there was financial incentives there to do it. And Hammer took advantage of that. But that's why we get quite a lot of sitcom adaptations back then, whereas like you don't in the 80s. And that was about the same time that Ralph Bates was doing his stuff in the early 70s with Hammer. After that, he went on to just a jobbing actor, really. He was a villain in Poldark when they did a version of that in the 70s. He played a lot of French characters because he was half French. He spoke French. So he ended up playing a lot of French.
So he could do the accent.
Yeah. He's the great-great-great-grandson of Louis Pasteur. Sort of
that's interesting. That is genuinely, that's the sort of thing that makes my eyes light up. I love that stuff.
Yeah. So his mother was French. But yeah, I mean, pretty standard story of him. He actually went to Yale Drama School. He went to America to go to drama school. And then went into rep, you know, Hammer horror, established himself as a jobbing actor. So Dear John was something of a anomaly, yeah. But I think it's an interesting choice. And I think going for a straight actor for that role makes sense on paper because you want him to be the straight man in the comedy world.
But I do recall, I'm sure you can tell me more about this, but he died quite soon afterwards, didn't he? He died quite young.
Yep. He died in 1991, which is actually 4 years.
This was made 86, 87.
Yeah, that's it. So the general consensus was they were going to do more, and they didn't because he died. But also, if you recall from our One Foot in the Grave episode, the first series of One Foot in the Grave, which was 1990, got rushed into production to fill the slot that they had booked for Dear John. So for whatever reason...
That's why we're doing this, isn't it? When you mentioned that, when we did the One Foot in the Grave, that's where the seed was planted. I'd forgotten that. There we go.
But so that suggests they were planning to film in 1990 and then it got taken off. But I also know that Ralph Bates died in 91, but he died of pancreatic cancer, but he only got his diagnosis like 10 weeks before.
It's a quick one, isn't it?
It is. Once, he's got it. So, but he may have been ill before that, but that was by the time, you know. So right. I don't know why that series got cancelled. But yeah, even if they were going to do it then, it would have been a 3-year gap. That's quite a hiatus. I'm not quite sure, but I think basic the idea was to do more. And they didn't. And yeah, he died. He was only 50 or 51 or something. So yeah, not much post-game there on Ralph Bates. I have one other bit of sitcom trivia, though, for you about Ralph Bates. His first wife was Joanna van Gysegem. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce that, Gysegem. But she is Linda in Duty Free. So she is
out.
The other woman, the one who's not funny in Duty Free.
Yes. The one that hapless Keith Barron's having an affair with.
That is correct, yes. But just on that note, I'll just give you another little divorce trivia, because that makes sense in this. So Mrs. Arnott is played by Jean Chalice. Does that name ring any bells?
John Chalice?
John Chalice, who plays Boise in Only Fools and Horses. She was his first wife.
Wow.
Back in the 60s.
Blimey.
So they were long divorced by the time either of them worked with John Sullivan. So I don't know if he recommended her. I don't know what their relationship was like. But she does appear in an episode of Only Fools and Horses after this, actually, later on. But here's another little sitcom connection for you. She appears in the episode of One Foot in the Grave that we focused on in our episode.
Really?
Yes, you know Ronnie and Mildred, who the annoying people who can visit? She's Mildred.
She's Mildred.
She's on screen for almost 4 seconds.
Well, I'm going to say, now you've pointed it out, I still can't remember. But,
No.
but I'll take your word for it.
So yeah, another jobbing actor, basically.
Well, I'll tell you what then, before we get too far into the cast, we will come back and we'll talk about all the other actors. But let's return to our episode and finish off that before we go through the cast. So we've been around the zoo with Toby. And then he gets back to the house to bring Toby home. And Uncle Mike's not there. He's at the rugby club with his mates getting drunk. Wendy's annoyed because her new man is neglecting her. Yeah. And so she decides to take it to exact her revenge by seducing John.
Well, just a little bit of trivia before I forget. The boy there who's playing his son is Ralph Bates's actual son.
Oh, okay.
So obviously they've got natural chemistry. It is quite a nice... Like, it doesn't feel like an actor child, I guess, but it feels like a nice natural performance. So that's nice. But yes, we don't see him anymore in this episode after that. So yeah, this whole scene, the whole bit before has all been shot on location, on the doorstep at the zoo. So now we're back into a studio setup. So we're in front of a studio audience. But one of my first notes here was, they're not getting any laughs. There's punchlines. There's lines that are obviously supposed to be jokes. Maybe not big hitters, but it's a little joke, little thing here. And it's just not getting much in the way of polite titters even. And I'm not...
Maybe it was like take 25, because honestly, she's not doing it very well.
Well, that's what I thought, possibly. Maybe, they're having some problems and having to
I did think... I mean, you can perhaps tell me who played Wendy and what her background is, but I said earlier about how sometimes it felt really stagey. This was a really egregious example of that, where it felt like she was... I don't know, she was performing rather than acting, rather than just being the character.
Well, maybe we did have some good times. I just don't remember them very well, that's all. All I remember is you spending every evening and every weekend marking the homework from your rotten school.
Yeah, well, I was a teacher.
I figured that one out for myself. Well, I know you had to bring the work home. I just wanted you to spend a little time with me.
Yeah, we do see her again in the second series, but not really much more than this. This is about as in-depth as it gets. The scene on paper should work, but there's just, like you said, just these lines that aren't hitting. I guess there's no chemistry between them, really, to say that they're...
That's a good way of putting it.
And that is quite a big thing in terms of this character, because we know he gets walked all over by her, but it's the ex-wife. We've seen in previous episodes that he tries to get one up on her, but he never can. He's paying the mortgage, he's paying for her car, he's paying for her boyfriend's whiskey, and he's living in a crappy bedsit. He should be angry.
Yeah.
And he is for very brief seconds. But what a great dynamic that, there's some reason they were together. They were in love. Perhaps there's still some chemistry there.
But you don't see it.
There's no chemistry, is there? But we have to believe for this scene to work that there is. And we don't even get a kind of manipulative sense from her, because ultimately it turns out she's kind of using him to make Mike jealous. Yes. That's the punchline of the scene, I guess. But even that doesn't quite play. He comes back in, but he doesn't come back in and go, "Oh, what's going on? What's with my missus here? He just comes in and she's like, "Oh, right, you can sod off now." Yeah. There's just no drama to anything. There's no climax to anything. It's all so flat.
Yeah, and again, so Wendy leaves the room for some reason, and so we're left with Ralph Bates and Mike, the guy who's usurped his life. And Mike's a bit of a dick, but again, John's just like, oh yeah, we used to be mates,
But that's another
everything
thing.
All right.
The gag is she ran off with my best mate, and I think they wrote that at the beginning, and then when it actually came to, this is obviously 5 episodes in where they go, right, we're going to see the wife, we're going to see the boyfriend. There's no commitment to it. Seeing those two characters, if I said, oh, those guys used to be best mates, they were at uni together, they came up they played rugby together, there's no connection between them.
It's the same as the the chemistry between John and Wendy. It's just not there, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, we used to be such good mates. When I came down to London, you were the one who took me under your wing, helped me settle in the big city, invited me to dinner.
Now, how did you repay me? You started having an affair with my wife, you broke up my marriage, and then had me thrown out of my house.
That still rankles with you, doesn't it?
And if the character was just some guy that she's shacked up with, that could work. There'd be some awkwardness there. They don't know each other. They don't know, I don't know how to feel. But the idea is they're mates. And also, would you not have hired an actor to play that role? Apparently they didn't do that. Like, in a series that has some pretty poor performances, this is the worst.
And is that because they'd written somewhere earlier in an episode that he was Welsh and they realised they had nobody who could do a Welsh accent?
Apparently, yeah, there's no one in Britain at the time who could do a Welsh accent, including the man they hired. Oh, it is an awful performance, not just because of the accent, but it's just a weirdly wooden, like he's got nothing to offer. I've looked him up. He's got several credits. You know, he's not like a well-known... I couldn't place him. I thought perhaps he's a real rugby player or something of the time, and they just brought him in as a kind of cameo, but they didn't even do that.
But I think it's interesting what you say about, like, this is the only real time we explore that side of his life and that world. And you're right, there's potentially more there, but what does that add to to the characterization of John? It's just made him even more pathetic, really, and that, frankly, is not required.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't think there's ever any thought as to what does this say about the character. It's just like, what will be funny in this situation? What's?
I think your observation is really good, that this is not really about his former life. The sitcom is about his current life and finding his way in the world. And so that's almost irrelevant. Not that we shouldn't ever talk about it, but we don't need to see it.
Yeah. And there is a moment that I do like in this scene. So the wife, she's kind of going all flirty. She gets up and goes over to the settee. And John, in his kind of slightly nervous, I'm not sure how to play this way, we got her on the settee, and then in the background, he's still sat at the table. And he gets up very determinedly and then sits back down and then gets up and like brings the drinks over in a kind of desperately rushed way. It's a really nice bit of physical comedy in a show that frankly doesn't go very physical much. It's quite subtle. It's really nice. I think it's something that's not on the page. I don't know if it's the actor that's decided to do that, whatever.
Yeah.
But it just works really nicely. It's just a beautiful comedy moment.
Oh, well, that's nice you found something.
And then we have the bit where she's like, oh, be rough with me, and he doesn't know how to do it. And it's like, that works as a comedy bit. He kind of just thrashes around on the settee for a bit. But, I think that's fine. That works as a sitcom-y thing.
I tell you what, they did, they were sort of arguing, and then she pours them both a whiskey, and suddenly the mood mellows, and they start laughing. I was like, bloody hell, you haven't even drunk it yet.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah. All right, so let's leave Wendy and Mike behind.
Yeah.
So the next scene is we cut to the party, which is, what's her name? Mrs. Boyd Peters' party.
Yes.
And that we've had it set up here that she's got some embarrassing problem. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's exactly what you think it's going to be. She farts.
Farting is always funny. That's
it is always funny, but when we have this big reveal of what will the problem be, I was like, is it just going to be that she farts? Because that seems a bit too obvious. Yeah, that's what it is.
It's a bit too much of a build-up for quite a
don't
week.
overplay your hand. The joke here is that Mrs. Boyd Peters has very loud flatulence. And when she farts for the first time, John, because he's a gentleman, he stands up in front of everyone. He says, excuse me, I do beg your pardon. And so he sort of takes one for the team and relieves the pressure of the social embarrassment.
Yeah.
Everyone else is confused by this because they never experienced such good manners. She does it a second time, and Ralph, taking his lead from John, does the same thing. And of course, the punchline to the scene is Kirk, having learned, this is what you're supposed to do. She farts again, and he steps forward and he says,
That's all right, Mrs. Boyd Peters, you have that one on me.
Now that actually made me laugh. That was the only time Kirk made me laugh the whole way through.
I think it's the only time Kirk made me laugh, and I've seen every episode. I put that.
It was a genuinely funny punchline.
I put that in my notes. This might be the best thing Kirk does in the whole series. I put in my notes. So yeah, obviously. Yeah. And it's not just the line. He delivers it beautifully. He does this little hand wave thing.
Timing.
Yeah.
There's some great comic timing there. We've talked about the lack of timing. That is delivered really well, that line.
Yeah, it is a nice bit. Interestingly, though, speaking of Kirk there, in this episode, like, he's just being an annoyance. He's walking around, like, flicking peanuts at people. Even for him, it's slightly out of character.
It's a bit much.
When we see him with Sylvia and he's, like, dancing, he's got his hand on her bum and, like, he's just being a bit too forward, that's Kirk.
Yeah.
But then just him being like an annoying child, I know that's kind of what he does, but it's too... There is a certain innocence to when he's annoying that he doesn't even realise it. But then again, that's not consistent. There's another thing, and especially if that character is an act, does that work? Yet another element that just doesn't quite fit with the characters. Should I take this opportunity to speak of Peter Blake? He plays Kirk.
Well, yeah. I'd like to sort of go through all the actors. Have we sort of finished with the episode? I mean, we've sort of talked through that scene, really, haven't we? That's
yeah. I mean, the one thing we do get at the end there is that, you know, Sylvia kind of propositions John, basically asks him out, and he politely tries to weasel his way out of it. But then the sort of the punchline of the episode really is him going, "Oh, people can be so terrible to each other," without even realizing, as he rips up her phone number and throws it away, and then he's suddenly confronted with it. Again, It's just not exactly a big button on the episode.
I thought it was really tragic. You know, he's obviously still not over his ex-wife, and it was just a really tragic moment. And unfortunately, poor old Sylvia's going to be upset by that. But you know, there's nothing funny about that.
Yeah, it's not funny.
I think it was a real moment of tragedy.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's finish that episode, anticlimax and all. So yeah, we talked a bit about Ralph Bates. So yeah, tell me about Peter Blake, who plays Kirk.
Scottish, actually, originally, and trained at the Scottish RADA, I guess is what it is. But he was more a musical guy. He did a lot of Western musicals. He did Jesus Christ Superstar, that sort of thing. And he played Frankenfurter in the Rocky Horror Show for a long... Like, he played it off and on for 20 years. You know, it was a regular thing he went to.
Right.
He had a regular role in Agony, which is the Maureen Lipman sitcom, which was made sort of 1979 to 81, I think it was. So he was a regular role in that, as was Peter Denyer, who plays Ralph in this. They were both regular characters. But it seems like everything Peter Blake has played in terms of his better-known stuff are like swaggering kind of Elvis knockoff, out-of-date John Travolta characters.
Well, I suppose Frankenfurter is the extreme version of that.
I guess so, yeah. But like in the 70s, he was in a famous run of Pepsi adverts, which was sort of set in a 1950s style American diner with a kind of grease aesthetic, and he's basically looks like he looks in this show.
Yeah, with
the sideburns and the open shirt, and he's like he's singing a song about how great Pepsi is.
Yeah.
Like that was a big run of adverts, you know, so he was kind of in the public eye for that, I guess, as much as one is for an advert. But off the back of that, he released a single called Lip Smacking Rock and Roller, which was basically the song from the Pepsi advert with less overt Pepsi references.
Lip Smacking Rock and Roller.
Yeah, because it was Lip Smacking Pepsi, that was the advert. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But sort of in character, I guess. Reached number 40 in 1977, and he was on top of the pops. So even though it was a number 40, it was obviously kind of quirky enough that it was like, oh, this will make a good show, you know?
So I said a minute ago that Kirk St. Moritz looked like he should have been in Shawaddy Waddy.
Yes.
I guess he was, more or less.
Yeah. Like he's done all sorts of just odd guest appearances in sitcoms. Just a fair bit of comedy. He's in an episode of The High Life, which is a personal favourite of mine, in which he plays an ageing rocker. You know, I guess he was probably pushing 50 by then, so at least he was ageing. He seems to have finished his career in the panto scene. You know, but you can see that. You can see him playing big, over-the-top characters.
You can see him as a dame, actually, definitely.
Yeah, okay, I can see that, yeah. But interestingly, he was also in, I don't know if you remember this, in 2004, there was Mike Reed, as in radio DJ Mike Reed.
DJ Mike Reed, not Pet.
Yes,
Mike Reed.
Exactly. He obviously fancied himself as a musical writer. He did like a Cliff Richard jukebox musical. He wrote a musical based on the life of Oscar Wilde, and it's one of the famous flops. It ran for one performance.
I've heard of that, yeah.
So, yes, Peter Blake played Oscar Wilde in that.
Oh, my God.
So
that's a claim to fame.
That's his claim to fame.
See, that Mike Reed UKIP Calypso, that's the sort of thing you could imagine Kirk St. Moritz doing.
Oh dear. Yeah, so immediately after Dear John, in 1988, he was in a sitcom called Dog Food Dan and the Carmarthen Cowboy, which might be
Now,
the
I
worst
remember
title for I've ever heard.
I not only do I right, okay. Let me be clear. When I say I remember this, what I remember is the theme tune.
Yes.
We're gonna have to drop the theme tune in because I'm gonna sing it, but there's no way you're gonna edit this out. Dog Food Dan and the Carmarthen Cowboy.
Oh, wow. That is impressive that you...
But that is literally all I know. All I can remember about the entire production is those two lines of the song.
That is an exact rendition, because you can't have heard that for 32 years. That's pretty
No,
impressive.
that is lodged. That's lodged deep. That.
I've watched a couple of episodes just because it popped
you
up
poor
in my
bastard.
research. I thought, oh, that sounds like something that will be interesting to me.
And wasn't it? My recollection is that they were two lorry drivers from different parts of the country who knew each other because they would cross paths, and they were each having an affair with the other's wife.
That's correct, yes.
That's it. I've got the setup there.
That's it. How much more do you need? Hello, Alan here, just dropping in because since we recorded this episode, I've gone back to Dog Food Dan and the Carmarthen Cowboy. I've given it a full watch and I've given it a full review. And that review is on our YouTube page, British Sitcom History. Just search for that on YouTube, you should find it. Or search for Dog Food Dan and the Carmarthen Cowboy, you'll find the series on YouTube and hopefully my video along with it. So that's part of my Forgotten Sitcoms series, in which I look at lesser known sitcoms and generally try and work out why they're forgotten, because they're mostly crap. So check that out and check out all the other stuff on the YouTube page there. Okay, let's get back to looking at the career of Peter Blake. But he's good in that, you know, in as much as it's a solid comedy sitcom performance. I think he's a solid comedy actor, and but this character just doesn't play. And I think part of the problem is that the character doesn't make any sense
agreed.
As a character who's playing a character. And then when we see the real him, he's worse at playing the real him. That feels like a worse performance.
Yeah.
Like that, the rock and roller, lip smacking rock and roller character, he can obviously do that. Playing a geeky loser living with his mum, he can't do it. And I think that means that whole twist reveal just doesn't play at all.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, that's Peter Blake. He died in 2018.
Oh, did he? Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was 70 years old. It's not exactly.
That's a long time.
He was
So how
16.
old was he? Okay, so he's probably older than I think. Like I say, I looked up ages and he was younger than me. I'm 44, so he was younger than me then.
Yeah, I mean, he was born in 1948. He would have been
Bloody hell,
38
that's a long time ago,
when
isn't it?
this started. Yeah. We sort of briefly mentioned Belinda Lange earlier.
Yeah, so Belinda Lange went on to do 2.4 Children, didn't she? And that was a big hit.
That's probably what she's going to be best remembered for. Yeah, she's another one pretty standard. Like, her parents were actors, so she kind of got into that. But Dear John is one of her first major roles. And she's, 33 or something. So it's not, she's been jobbing around for 10 and 15 years.
So I guess
or whatever.
I'm stereotyping here, but if her parents were actors, then she's probably quite theatrical. She would have played her trade that way.
Yeah. More theatre work, I guess. Certainly in more recent years, focused on theatre. There's not a lot of TV stuff sort of in the last 20 years since 2.4 Children finished.
Oh, that's interesting, because that was a big hit. I would have thought that potentially she could have gone on to do more, but I can't think of anything she's done since then.
Well, they did that for 9 years. I think she was just, maybe she just like, I'll get back to the stage or whatever. I like I say, I really like her. She at the same time as she was doing 2.4 Children, there was another show called Second Thoughts, another sitcom in which she was in that, which she played much more of a character, much more of a comedy character. Because I think in 2.4 Children, she plays like the sturdy mum, she is about as close to like the normal one, and same in this.
What about the others then? So you mentioned the actor who plays Ralph was with Peter Blake in Agony. So what's his name?
Peter Denyer. So he, as a younger actor, was best known because he was in the sitcom Please Sir.
Okay.
Playing one of the school kids. So Please Sir was set in a school and all the school kids were played by like 28-year-olds. Yeah. And Peter Denyer was one of them. And it's remarkable how similar his character in that is to Ralph. Like definitely more of a bit of an idiot, naive fool rather than nerd, but in the same way that Ralph is naive, and very similar, sort of softly spoken, doesn't quite understand what everyone else is talking about kind of character.
So there's a direct line between Please Sir and the casting agent for Dear John.
Yeah, it feels like it.
Seen Please Sir.
But also in Agony, I can't remember exact details, but I think, Maureen Lipman's character, she has these neighbours who are a gay couple, and he's one of the gay couple.
Right.
But it was quite groundbreaking in 1979 because they were a gay couple, but they weren't ridiculous camp characters. They're just a couple of guys who happened to be in a relationship. Both have beautiful moustaches. But other than that, they were quite stereotype free. Pretty groundbreaking in 1979.
To be fair, my dad had a luxurious moustache in 1979.
Well, there you go.
I don't think that's a sexuality thing.
But yeah, Peter Denyer was one of them. So, bit of sitcom history. But I don't know if I've seen anything that really makes me think great actor in what I've seen.
Has he been in anything since, dear John?
Nothing too significant. He stepped away from being in front of the camera, and he spent the latter part of his career writing pantomimes, but also I think producing and directing them. But when I say writing pantomimes, I don't mean like he was like the primo pantomime writer of the 90s and 2000s. Like that was.
I'm trying not to be dismissive here. What do you mean? What do you mean? I mean, don't they kind of write themselves?
Well, someone's got to get paid for it. But yeah, I don't know exactly what that means. Just churning out the same old stories with some weak innuendo attached.
Yeah, just update the topical references.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but he churned them out, and he was well respected in the pantomime world. Yes, he died in 2009.
Okay,
relatively young, early 60s.
Yeah,
but that's his lineage of the pantomimes world.
Who's left? Louise. Who plays Louise?
Yeah, so Louise was played by Rachel Bell. Again, this was kind of one of her first major roles. She did appear in an episode of Only Fools and Horses the year before, so I don't know if John Sullivan kind of liked what he saw or anything like that. She's one of those people who's just on guest appearances and things. She was in Darling Buds of May as a regular. She was in Grange Hill for a few years. She's currently in Doctors.
Okay.
So she's working.
So that's one of those programs that I've never seen, but there's like 500 episodes, isn't there?
Yeah,
it's been going for years and years.
Basically, daytime soap. So she's working, she's doing all right, and she's 70 years old now, so that's a good career. But the one little interesting sitcom sort of trivia in her career is that in 2010 she was in a stage adaptation of Keeping Up Appearances, playing Hyacinth Bouquet.
Yes, I can see that.
You can see that, can't you?
Casting,
Makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
So that's our main cast. Is there any other snippets of information about the sort of recurring guest roles?
So obviously John has a friend called Ken who appears in a few episodes, and his wife was played by Sue Holderness,
who plays Boyce's wife, right?
Who is Marlene in
Marlene? Thank you. Yes, I watched that episode today, and yes, that was killing me. Thank you, Marlene.
Yes, so she appears in a few episodes.
So, wife of a mate of the protagonist is her thing.
She is in a few episodes, like quite significantly though. There is another character I'd like to talk about who appears in 2 episodes at the beginning of series 2. Rick Fortune.
Ah, yes.
Played by Kevin Lloyd.
Well, played by Tosh Lines off of the bill.
Yeah, Tosh off of the bill.
As soon as he appeared, it's Tosh in a denim jacket. Brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. With sideburns instead of a side.
Do you know, I'd love to know how long it's been since Tosh Lines was in the bill, because I know the bill's not been on for 10 years, but in my head, he's still on there every night.
I mean, he died in like 1998.
Did he? Oh, mate, break it to me gently. Jeez.
So in the first episode of series 2, he's sort of the new character who's come in, and we get introduced to him, and the episode largely revolves around him. And then episode 2 also is a big deal on him, where John gets him to perform and stuff like that. And again, just an example of weird choices of writing to bring in this new character, really make him a serious focus for 2 episodes, and then we never see him again.
And he's gone. That's interesting, because I saw the second episode of those, and it was obvious, it was apparent that this guy wasn't new. He'd already been introduced in the previous episode. And then he disappears. He literally drives off into the night at the end. And I thought, surely that can't be it. This is a new character.
It's not even a really good conclusive ending, is it?
No,
because there's a sense that John might win him back.
He drives off into the night, but it's not clear that you're never going to see him again.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame for a few reasons. First of all, it just makes that seem really odd that he's there and such a big presence for so long. Secondly, I think he's a really good character and a nice presence. I think it's a nice performance.
He's a good foil to Kirk in that episode as well.
Yes.
He sort of fights back against Kirk and throws it back a little bit. Whereas in the first season, Kirk's just basically saying whatever the hell he likes, and everyone is just not reacting really. You know, they're just accepting it and not telling him to get stuffed. Whereas, where I'm going to call him Tosh. Tosh does, you know, he throws it back a little bit.
The problem with that, though, is that Kirk in those episodes becomes different to how he usually is. But again, it doesn't feel deliberate or explored. It just feels like, well, we need this character to do something different today. So
in that episode too, there was a nastiness to Kirk.
Yes.
That whereas normally he's hurtful, but not really deliberately. Whereas when he was interacting with Tosh, he was going out to hurt his feelings on purpose, and it felt different.
And I think if you bring that in as a regular character, you can explore that and do something with it. But they don't. I think ultimately the point of it is that Kirk is this fantasist who makes up stupid stories. So when this guy comes in who's got some kind of genuine, quite exciting stories about life in the music industry, it's a threat. He's a bit more exciting than me, and I'm making it all up.
Yeah.
Again, if you explore that, play with the character, knowing that Kirk is actually Eric Morris, a sad, pathetic loser man, then there's so much room for stuff there. But it's like, oh, sorry, we can't do any of that because we've got to deal with John doing some crap.
Incidentally, in that episode, the sort of stage show at the end, we end with a guest appearance from Freddie and the Dreamers.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, Freddie and the Dreamers, that's ancient history, isn't it? 20 years since Freddie and the Dreamers when that was made. That'd be like, that's more up to date than having Blur or Oasis on now.
Yes, it is.
Unbelievable. I'm so old.
Yeah, you're right, yeah. You just have Jarvis Cocker popping up in a cameo or something.
Yeah, it would be the equivalent. Yeah.
Interestingly, they did an American version, and they so in the US version with Judd Hirsch, they repeated several episodes, like not exactly word for word, but they took the John Sullivan
Well,
script.
this is interesting because you sent me. They were all on YouTube, the American ones. And you sent me a link to. I watched the first episode, which was shot for shot, almost a copy of the first episode of the British one. But would I be right in assuming there are a lot more episodes in America, as it tends to be?
There are, yeah. Well, just to quickly finish the little point I was going to make. In the American version, when they do that episode, it's Freddie and the Dreamers are the band that turn up.
In New York?
Yeah, wherever it's set. Yeah.
Wherever.
Because Freddie and Dreamers had a couple of American hits, so that's close enough.
Good for them.
But yes, but now we're on the American version. I watched the first episode that I sent to you. I also watched one just from later on, just to kind of get a feel of it. But yeah, they took. I think they adapted most of the British episodes quite straight. And then, had other people write new ones. And the characters are all there, we see them all, and they bring in a couple of new characters later on. But ultimately, it was pretty faithful to what the British one is.
But what was interesting was that the Louise character, so she's this kind of haughty, upwardly mobile character in the British version. In the American version, they've characterised that by making her British.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
She is basically the exact same character, yeah, but I don't know if it's ever explained why she's in America.
But no, it's interesting that, obviously, as I say, I only watched that first episode and it just followed the same plot beats as the British one. Did you go into how the characters develop within the American world?
I don't know if they develop much at all. I know, like, the Kate equivalent ends up having a baby near the end or something like that, so she ends up in a relationship.
Despite being frigid.
Yeah, exactly. The one major thing was that Kirk, there's no reveal that he is something else. He just is that ridiculous character. So that's the one major thing. Although there is a running thing that he lies a lot, and then when they pull him up on it, he finds some kind of scheme to make it look more convincing or whatever. So he's still kind of a bullshitter, but not in quite the same way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Judd Hirsch is good casting for that, and I think he's a bit more charming perhaps than Ralph Bates is. But I also don't think it, from what little I saw, to be fair, I didn't want to watch any more. And it's the same script, so it's not like.
But you didn't want to watch any more of the British one, did you?
One thing I did notice in that very first episode, obviously in Dear John, he loses the house because he gives it to his wife, but he can't afford to pay rent on that. He can't afford to pay the mortgage and his own place, so he ends up in this dingy little bedsit,
I know what you're going to say. The dingy little bedsit in America is massive, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it starts with a character I think is supposed to be his sister and the brother-in-law. They come in and they're like, oh God, this apartment's horrible, but let's make it say
looks all right.
say it's nice. Say it's nice. The biggest apartment I've ever seen. Like, this is like I've lived everywhere I've ever lived has been worse than this.
Yes, I took that same note.
But I think Judd Hirsch definitely plays. It feels more like a comedy performance.
Yeah.
Which perhaps, Ralph Bates is not a comedy actor, but it feels like they're embracing that. And like he's the straight man, so that's okay. And like I say, I think that just doesn't work somehow.
Yeah. So, Dear John, I think, let's try and summarise it. I mean, I don't think we liked it. I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it. As I said, my memory of it was not. It's not like I had this beautiful, rosy memory of it, and I'm really disappointed. I don't remember it with all that much fondness, other than it was just part of my childhood. But I mean, bluntly, it's just not very good. The central character is not sympathetic. He's pathetic. The supporting characters are either too cartoonish or too unsympathetic, or both. It just feels like it doesn't really know what it's about. It doesn't seem to be making any point.
Yeah.
And it's not funny enough to get away with that.
Yeah, that's it. I've been struggling to put my finger on, like, what is it that's not working? And I think it's just aimless. It's not saying anything. It's not doing anything. And it's not funny enough to get away with it.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to go, like, are the performances off? Well, yeah, they are. But how much? Is the writing off? Yeah, it's not strong writing. There's some moments that are nice, but it's not consistent. It doesn't feel like anyone cares. There doesn't feel like a great deal of passion in this. I mean, total speculation here, but like it feels like they'd lost interest. Like that initial premise was like, oh yeah, that's a good premise, and then it kind of didn't play out.
Yeah.
But because it's John Sullivan, by the time it hadn't played out, it'd already been commissioned. So it's like, oh well, whatever. It feels like a bit of a damp squib, and I can see why it hasn't stood the test of time.
I think it's we are trying to talk about a variety of sitcoms here, not necessarily the best ones. We hope to cover the best ones as well, but regardless of whether Dear John was any good or not, I think it's important that we do talk about some of those perhaps lesser known ones in between the tent poles, and we'll continue to do that. So if any of our listeners have got any suggestions, preferably not just crap sitcoms, but perhaps lesser known sitcoms that might be that might have good memories for you, then let us know and we can put them into our schedule.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to share your thoughts on Dear John, the best way to do that is at our social media. So Twitter and Instagram, we are at BritcomPod. So find us there. We're having some nice conversations about sitcoms over there. Get involved. If you've enjoyed it, then please do go back, listen to some of our other episodes. And if you really liked it, then why not go and rate and review us on iTunes and, just generally shout about how great we are and help us get more listeners. Thank you for listening. We will be back next week.